All right, let's get back to some panel action, guys. We're here in Nashville, so it's a great town to talk about music. And we're about to hear some seasoned industry executives explore the ever-changing world of the music business. They're going to examine the technology-driven challenges facing creators and consumers and the opportunities for entrepreneurs to help address them. So please help me welcome Joe Galante, former chairman of Sony Music, Heather McBee, director of the Project Music Accelerator and formerly with Sony Music, and Randy Goodman, the current chairman of Sony Music, along with our moderator, David Ross from Music Row magazine. Please let him hear it.
What'd you say?
You should cook this.
Okay.
Do not put the short girl in the middle.
Okay.
Water.
Well,
There I
mine's
go.
in the middle.
I'll just
No water.
Okay.
Get some
All right.
water.
We need water. Because I am sitting in the middle.
Well, thank you for the nice introduction, and I'd like to say hello to everybody. As you can see, it took a minute to get me wired up back here, so I'm still getting used to it. My name's David Ross, and very excited to be with you all today. As a publisher journalist, I've written about the music industry for almost 4 decades. And over that time, I guess we've all seen how technology has put its thumb on virtually every industry on the planet, really, from healthcare to travel, retail, you name it. Everybody's been affected in one way or another by technology. And so today, we are going to try and perhaps uncover some entrepreneurial opportunities that might speed the evolution and improve profits using technology for the music industry. So our panel today features a crew of real veteran superheroes, and I'm really not overstating that one bit. They have triumphed through so many of these dramatic changes, and they still seem to be pretty happy standing right in the center of the hurricane. So let me introduce them to you. There's a lot more about them, I guess, in your app or kit. Their full bios are somewhere that you have access to. I'm just going to go right down the line here. Joe Galante, longtime record label head. He's run RCA in both Nashville and New York City, also BMG and Sony in Nashville. He's a mentor in residence at the Entrepreneur Center here in Nashville, and has a very active entertainment consulting company as well. Give him a quick round of applause. Thank you. All right, that's good. Heather? We don't want to get them too excited before the panel. Heather McBee is our next panelist. Heather has spent over 20 years working in the music and radio industries, and at the same time building a huge expertise in the digital music space. She now uses all that experience to help entrepreneurs as the VP of Accelerator at the Nashville Entrepreneur Center program, and also Project Music. Heather McBee.
Thank you.
And last but not least, Randy Goodman. Randy just became the top dog at Sony Music Nashville. I think it was about 8 months ago, maybe? 11 months ago. Well, time flies when you're having fun. And he's returned to the label that he originally worked under Joe Galante with, both in Nashville and New York. And Heather has also worked with both, well, with everybody here. So there's a lot of connectivity on our panel. And Randy also was the head of Disney's Nashville imprint in Nashville, Lyric Street Records. So, Randy Goodman. So I'm going to take a seat because my part here is almost over and I'm getting tired. And so let's throw out the first question to everybody. You know, we think a lot of times that change, especially in the music industry, really just began in the year 2000 or so with Napster and MP3s. But actually, technology has been a constant force for the music industry all the way back from piano rolls to vinyl, cassettes, CDs, for almost over a century. So the question here is this. Were the changes before the MP3 less disruptive than what is happening now post-MP3? And what are your feelings about why?
Well, when I joined the business, the LP was moving into the cassette and 8-track world, and you were moving from the cassette 8-track world into the CD world, into the digital world. Each of those configurations increased mobility for the consumer because you weren't stationary anymore, having to sit around by a turntable. And with each of those configurations, prices went up. So for a long period of time, when you look at the sales of the music business, hitting the famous $20 billion, you could see that each of those configurations added revenue, and there wasn't an additional cost to it. And in certain cases, as some of you may remember, people, when we transitioned from cassette to CD, people bought the same record all over again. And then when we went to digital, we still had people who were buying CDs because we weren't at the point of portability in the car to a degree. So all that got to around 2000 where, well actually 2008 when Eminem came out with his second record, and that was the peak of pricing. That was a 1998 list for music. So all during that time, all those configurations just added dollars, huge dollars to the business. And then we come to the other side of it. And as you've talked about before, David, when you've spoken about this, we've gone from dollars to dimes to digital pennies or tenths of pennies. So, you know, you kind of see the whole bell curve coming through that. And so it was completely different before.
I'm just thankful for the high list price because that's what enabled Joe to then have my position at the label to figure out the internet stuff and the MP3s that were coming. So I wasn't quite there yet.
But Heather, what do you think though really about the, you know, I mean, what has the digital been a lot more disruptive than, because as Joe just pointed out very nicely, all the changes have had their effects. I mean, they've all been, they've all changed the way everything worked.
It's definitely more I think more disruptive now, but that lends to more opportunity because on the CD side, when we had a physical piece of product, we had higher costs in order to get that into the marketplace. But one of the things that digital and technology have done is they've created opportunities to go back and mine back catalog without the heavy cost and the heavy risk of carrying a physical inventory and creating new, unique ways of manipulating that content. Not in a bad way, in a creative way to manipulate that content to generate more revenue.
Randy, what's it look like from your view?
Well, as the current record guy, I would say, Heather, that's a nice try. But the new technology that we've experienced has been the first time that a new technology or a new configuration came into the marketplace and we didn't grow. In fact, it's been disruptive to the point that it's actually the industry has declined in significant ways, 50%. And so it's the first time that a new technology was ever introduced wherein there was no revenue growth. You go back, as Joe was talking about, vinyl went up and it peaked. I'd say maybe 8-track was the only other technology, but that was so short-lived because cassette coming in, and that was a high water mark. And then the CDs was a high water mark. But yes, this is the first time that we've actually had a new technology come in. And a part of that is, you know, you may look at it from a record perspective from a negative way, and a part of that is control, is that all the lines have come down, the democratization, if you will, of accessing music. And so a part of the problem that we're dealing with now in this new world is how do you monetize it and continue to make the investments at the level that we have always done in terms of new artists and developing them.
So, you know, one of the things that strikes me about it is, excuse me, but it's up until the digital change, the record labels were completely in control of the distribution of the music. They had vast systems to distribute the music, and therefore could control supply, demand, and pricing. And Napster perhaps was the bell ringing, those days are over. And I'm curious, do you think that's had an effect on the economy? Is that why we're seeing the economic difference on the post-MP3?
You want to go first on that one, then I'll disagree with you.
Well, I mean, there's an inherent sense of piracy in that, yes. And the music industry's taken a lot of flack over the years because what we tried to do is litigate ourselves out of that hole. But because the ability to pirate music was so much easier because it was smaller storage, that we were the first ones to get hit, and it's hit magazines and newspapers. It's tough that it hasn't really hit the movie industry because it just takes so much time and so much storage. It's still there.
Right.
But yeah, it was one of those things where we didn't know what hit us, kind of, so to speak. And so we tried to say we have these certain rights and claim those, and we tried to litigate ourselves out of that, which obviously wasn't a good idea, and it was disruptive in a negative kind of way. I think at a certain point in time, we realized that when Spotify came along and with Apple Music, there's been more of a sense of investment, even from the record side, into those businesses to say, okay, well, if this is going to be a part of the new paradigm and the new world order, then we need to be engaged with them in an investment way, because that's really where it's going.
I think that at that time, when we were in New York, Napster came about, and the reality was, because of the strength of the majors, they felt threatened in terms of the distribution channel. And so as opposed to embracing it and looking at it and saying, how is this going to look in 5 or 10 years, we dealt with now. And we owned the marketplace. I mean, there was no other distribution channel than ours. And even today, I would still say that you have, between the majors and the major independents, yes, people can get records, played or in the marketplace, and you can develop a career. It depends on your expectations. These guys are about tonnage and really having longevity. And other people can be happy at doing $2 or $3 million in revenue combined, and that's not really, that's not what they keep the doors open for. So sure. I think that's, the difference. The change in technology flattened out the entrance for everybody and lowered the ante to a certain degree. But to still grab the brass ring, you need a lot of resources to get there. And I think the other thing that technology did, because I know when I was running Sony, we had started a discussion about 360 deals. And so at that point, people were reticent to do that. Fast forward a couple of years and everybody's looking at the numbers and going, I get it. I understand why this works, because that was a much tougher sell a few years ago than it is today, because people realize they don't want to put up the capital, very much like anybody in the business over here that goes around and seeks capital on a round. That's where the capital comes from, is from the record companies to a large degree. Probably 90% of where the money is, not saying managers or a publisher or an agent won't put up some money, but primarily it's still the bank.
And David, if I may, to jump on what Joe was just talking about, that I think that's going to be kind of, again, what you see on the horizon is that new kind of holistic approach to artist and record company and management and promoter and agency, where we understand what role that we play. We've always been, to use the entrepreneurial term, we've always been the venture capitalist. The record company has been, in terms of seeing a new artist, like a venture person would see a new company and say, I want to invest my time and energy and money and expertise into that. I think now that we're in this paradigm shift, this disruptive thing with technology, to Joe's point, we're having to find new ways to become more engaged with the artists so that they benefit from us, but that we also benefit from our long-term investments in terms of both manpower and dollar resource. So I think that's one of the bright spots, is it really becomes more about, dare I say, or use this cliche of brand building, but it really is in a way to build an artist to the level of a largesse where you all have a larger pot to participate in.
So go ahead.
Just I'm going to ask you a question related to that kind of. So we're talking right now about the major label artists. So your model of the types of artists, your investments, if you will, that's changed in what you're looking for. Is that fair to say? Like the chance of you taking somebody right off the street that would be an idea stage artist might be a little different than when you were originally signing artists. Now you want them to come through the door with certain...
Yes, and I don't even know if that we're looking, I think it's a part of what's shifting about it is that, again, because of the democratization or whatever the right word is, I mean, we're having new artists come to us that already have websites, already doing social media, already have a record on maybe Sirius XM, have an EP up on iTunes, and so they're already doing missional branding, if you will, but they don't know that that's what they're doing, but they're already doing it when they come to us. So yeah, to your point, there's a lot of artist development that's taking place even before we get to them, and that historically was something that the record labels always did.
And I bring that up from the standpoint of the opportunity that, you know, you don't have the funding necessarily to put into doing that grassroots work that a lot of these artists that could be coming to the table with you. And I think a lot of the entrepreneurs in the room that we've experienced at the EC and throughout the country have been about that space. Like, how do you build your base before you walk in to try to get that major label deal?
Yeah, clearly the brand has to come up to a higher starting point because of the changes in ROI.
But I think it comes back to, you know, what your expectations are. You can have an artist like Sturgill Simpson who, you know, there's a place he can go where it's a reasonable way to make a living, but it's not the same as a Kenny Chesney or a Dave Matthews. But it depends on what you want and what you're willing to trade on the other side, because you're making a deal to be able to give up some of those rights in order to get access.
So let's talk a little bit about some of the tools. I mean, we just kind of pointed out how the economics of the business have changed. As you said, Joe, which I love that, from dollars to dimes to fractions of pennies. So what are some of the tools that you find yourself relying on the most now?
Well, I mean, we use analytics. We have analytics now that we never had before. I mean, you can actually drop, we have a new artist named Maren Morris, and we just dropped her album on Friday, and on iTunes, you can go in and you can look and you can see what are the consumers that are tasting Maren's album, if you will. Which ones are they downloading? Are they picking certain things? Or the IG tracks, you get the lift off of that when you're setting your record up within iTunes and Apple. So there are certain analytics that you can look at from a technology perspective that we never had before, where you might say everything that we used to do before when Joe and I were doing this together it always was instinctual, and it was always gut, and you were always trying to find some kind of objectivity or some kind of research that would help delineate something. And we have those analytics now. That's not to say that it takes the complete gut out of it, but also the analytics are there with Shazam. I mean, that's a new technology, and that's a new way that radio stations, it's a discussion that we have with them to say people are Shazamming this song at a high rate because traditional radio doesn't back announce, and so this is a way for people to find out who the artist is, and so that becomes another thing that we use to promote at radio. So there's all sorts of Spotify listens and streams and playlists and all those kinds of things. Those are all things that we are able to look at and point to something, point to a track, point to something that's emerging, use it as a promotional tool. The interesting thing about it is, as we speak about all this disruption, the RIAA in their industry report year-end last year, the primary place for people still to discover new music is at radio, which is kind of a strange thing to say, but that's still a major part of the energy, both manpower and dollar that we expend.
I think that part of what you're seeing too, and you know, to Randy's point, if you ask the folks at Universal what the analytics were on Chris Stapleton, I'm sure they were shitty. And for a long period of time, they were spending money and looking at shitty analytics. And then this kid, Justin Timberlake, stands on stage with him, and we're 1.4 million units later. So to Randy's point, there is this issue where, and you and I have had this discussion for probably 2 decades about the internet and the ability to force a record to the masses. And the unfortunate problem is, especially in certain formats, whether it be the pop format or the country format or to a large degree the R&B format, you still wind up with having to get terrestrial radio on your side to really drive the masses. And so someone like Adele is still somebody that benefits to the tune of 10 million units based on terrestrial radio. I think the disconnect is between what Randy's talking about with all the tools. They still have their research that they do, which is probably from the time that the 8-track was created. They're still using the same tools. So this business has moved on, and they're still, even though they have obviously overstated it,
Yes.
but it's still dated.
It's arcane.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's switch along here. So, you know, over the years, the relationship between the record industry and the technology industry, well, let's just say it hasn't always been a love affair the whole time. Certainly during the turn of the century with the Napster and MP3s coming out and piracy and all the new things that were coming, the music industry had trouble, shall we say, getting used to some of these ideas. But at this point, things have changed a fair amount. And after a series of trying to do the technological changes themselves, I think record labels and other music industry people are looking out now, outside of their industry, to try to find help for some of the things, the tools that they need. Is everybody feeling that now? Are you feeling that
the love?
No, well, I mean, are you feeling that really the industry has shifted to where it's really looking outside of itself for help on how to better manage all the new things from technology?
I think generally speaking, I'd like to think yes. We're 2 years into the Project Music Accelerator, which is predominantly supported by the music industry, and that's about supporting entrepreneurs. And Randy's a really busy guy. When Joe was joining this job, he was a really busy guy. When I was in the label, I was busy. We all knew what the issues were, but we didn't have time to sit down, dive in, and solve them. And it's for a label to fund the funds, hearing the economic state, they have to look outside at this point, because entrepreneurs, you guys are willing to work your asses off as entrepreneurs to try to fill that gap and help the industry solve pain points. But I think from the industry side, the ask is understand the industry that you're trying to work with. Don't try to take a hammer to hit a nail and fix a problem. Understand the pain points of the industry and how the licensing and all of that stuff works. Is that fair?
Yeah, that was good. I'm hoping we're going to have a few minutes for questions, so you can be thinking about that if you have a question out there.
I think, David, having been inside for a long period of time, and I think, Randy's seen some changes, especially at the Sony side in terms of technology, but the reality is when he wakes up in the morning, he's dedicated to working his artists. And when the entrepreneur wakes up, he's dedicated to building his company and solving a problem. And so his focus is different than his focus. And so when we're having those discussions, it's hard for him to carve out the time, even though he does, because we've had several meetings with several of the companies, and the town is, one of the great things about this town is from an infrastructure standpoint, everybody is accessible. You can get access to all mentors outside of the EC to anybody in the entertainment business in this town. And that's the attraction for coming here and then finding people who are willing to support you in terms of helping you build your company. But again, I come back to the issue of, the companies are used to taking bigger bets and press play or any of the investments they've made. And everybody has gone through, Live Nation has a little startup fund in there. And, they're just companies that are trying to take a shot at doing that. But bringing it back in, it's one of 10,000 things. It is not their focus. And it's still something that we have to work on both sides.
So you're glad to have entrepreneurial companies working on things
yeah.
for that reason?
Yeah, I'm amazed. That's coming out of the corporate side and into this side on the entrepreneur side. I do believe there is a mindset, and put the technology aside, there's just a mindset and an ethos that I think is helpful to the singular focus that an entrepreneur brings to solving the problem that you can't do here, because he's very much the quarterback. His head's on a swivel. He's looking at everything, trying to figure it all out at the same time and calling the plays on 20 acts at one moment. And so if we can get that door open between the two places, I think there'll be more solutions.
And to that as well, I'll leave company name out of it. The first year of our program, we went to New York. We had the benefit of having mentors from the local arm of one of the major labels. We went to New York, we sat down with them and said, okay, we're here. We know how to speak your language. We know how this helps you. We need a license. And the first answer in the first 5 minutes was, you're crazy. Our model doesn't work for this. It's not gonna happen. By the end of the meeting, it's like, well, wait a minute. There might be something here that we can figure out how to work with. A year later, license has been secured, but seeing that light come on of watching entrepreneurs sit in a room and talk about a new business model with a traditional company, not just the music industry, really any industry, it's a magical experience when you see them, both sides start really trying to understand and work together to figure out how to do this.
So I don't think, I'm going to just take a guess here, and you guys will immediately prove me right or wrong, but I'm going to guess that between the three panelists, if I was to say, tell me in like just one or two sentences, where's the greatest strengths and weaknesses right now in terms of revenue in the music industry? Just, I mean, I think this is obvious to us perhaps, but maybe not to everybody in the room. So, Joe, where's the money coming from?
Are you talking
The
about
lack of
music-
money?
Are you talking about the
Live.
music industry?
It's
In the
live.
music industry overall,
Okay.
yes.
Yeah, it's live.
Yeah, it's
I mean,
live.
live dominates the pie. It's, for an artist, it's, 70, 80% of what they're doing. And, if they're a writer, it's another 10 or 15%, depending on what goes on. You throw merch in the live. And then the record side is probably the smallest part of it. Unless you're Luke Bryant, in which case you move up a couple of points.
The only thing I would throw in there is one aspect of the industry that we don't always include in the industry itself, and that's radio. You think about the combined ad dollars that they bring in, that's another big chunk, and they're still making ad revenue on the radio side, even though it's coming down a bit, but it's still
It's
as
on their
big as the
publishing.
live space.
Yeah.
It's live. I had a unique stint between Lyric Street and Sony where I actually I dove into the management world and worked with a good friend who's a part of the Maverick group and a specific artist that I had been involved with at Lyric Street. And it was amazing to me to see, sitting with the business manager, just how little their revenue after selling north of 25 million albums, how little of their revenue came from any kind of pre-recorded music sales of any kind. It was all about live. And that goes back to the point about how we're going to have to continue to change into a more holistic approach and more what I would call a classic venture approach as a record company. And I think the other thing too, one of the things that Joe did, most of you don't know this, was that Joe was one of the guys the guy that really built the autonomous record company here in Nashville, where every service that was in New York or LA was here in Nashville, and that was kind of the industry that I was raised in. Now that I'm at Sony in this new role, a part of what I'm having to do is deconstruct what it was that Joe built, because we can't afford to be all things to all people. And so part of what's happening is there's these silos, if you will, of this is what we're really good at and this is what our focus needs to be. And then there is the management and publisher and the promoter and the agency. It's the agents that fly around on the private jets these days.
That sums it up right there, isn't it? That's good.
We ought to get some questions.
Yeah.
I'm going to go to questions in 1 second.
Okay.
I want to get one more really brief string of answers here. I was going to say if you were given a magic wand, but I guess in deference to the fact that we are in the Skirmahorn, if you were given a magic baton to conduct whatever, and one wish to help entrepreneurs, help the music industry, what would you ask for?
Transparency with the labels, because I think there are more issues in those companies that could be
I'm
solved.
going to just take a guess here, and you guys will immediately prove me right or wrong, but I'm going to get
Okay.
the magic baton is already at work.
You've now been recorded. That's available on iTunes.
Technology disrupted you, Dave.
That was
Do you know this is
disruptive
being
technology,
live-streamed,
all right.
So anyhow, the thing would be to have transparency between the labels and the entrepreneurs to really have an honest dialogue about what the issues are, because I think sometimes we have a number of entrepreneurs that have come through the door that they have a particular idea on how this is going to work and have no idea what the beast they're dealing with. So trying to get the understanding from the labels that we're not doing anything here except talking right now. We're trying to get the information we need to build this, to solve this. And if we do, are we going to work together and save a lot of that time?
Heather, anything you want to add?
To support entrepreneurs in this space,
Yep.
investment dollars. If you're interested, Heather McBee at ec.co. We have 16 of them in our pocket right now from the 2 years.
16 startups.
16 startups.
Yep. Randy, anything you want to add to that?
My magic baton would say, please, God, give me a bridge that gets me from here to there. And we see the trillions of streams that we're going to need to get to really make that, make the industry viable and healthy again as it once was. And to stop the decline, I guess that would be my wand, which is a bit of a hope. And that's not a strategy, but it's a wand. So there you go.
Good. So we have a few minutes left, and I'm wondering if we have anybody that wants to ask a question. Great. There's a microphone right there. Just announce yourself, please, and fire it out.
Hey, David Blutenthal, CEO of Snapwave. We're making music streaming more visually engaging. And my question is, what are your thoughts on how virtual reality and augmented reality are going to impact the music industry in terms of content and the kinds of experiences that we're going to see coming in the next few years?
We're going to go for brief answers so we can fire, rapid fire.
That particular application has got more in the live business with the major stars, and perhaps as the ability for some of the developing acts to, if they're creative enough, to be able to supply the content to develop the technology, to help the technology develop.
And I just think it would take the perfect app that could marry the imagery with the music and make it come out right.
Do you know of anything like that, Heather?
Maybe. It might be called Snapwave, according to David.
This was not staged, it was a real question.
All right, let's try our next question.
Hey, my name's Hasib Qureshi. I'm AudioHand CEO. We stitch crowdsourced audio together to create live recordings. And my big question is, since I have a unique opportunity to ask you guys this from the industry standpoint, where do you see the role of major record labels in the artist development? Do you see it becoming more of the final, let's scale this artist out into the masses and the worldwide markets because you have true access to that? Or is it also, let's try to find these artists at a discount so then we can profit more because we can capture them in more lucrative 360 deals? Like, where do you guys want to be?
Well, I don't know that it's either or. I'd love to find an artist at a discount, but
I mean, right.
But it's a funny thing because when I started Lyric Street Records, when I left working with Joe and started the company for Disney, that was '97, and I'm making deals now because there's fewer major labels, and so it's even more competitive. And some of the deals that I'm making now are more costly, more expensive than the deals I was making in the late '90s, early 2000s. But yet my upside isn't as great. And to answer your question specifically, I think it will always be a bit of both. Obviously, what we bring to a new artist is scale, and it can be global scale. And I think one of the things we didn't talk about with new technology that I think is very exciting is I went over earlier this year to C2C, which is a big country music initiative in London and other parts of Europe, and went to the O2, and there were 20,000 people there, and they were singing along with all these songs. And a part of that is because of streaming. We're not dependent on trying to get classic radio or BBC or government-run stations to drive these things. So that's a good part of the whole technology disruption that's been good on the global basis. But I think it's always going to be, I think, a bit of both. We're going to find something that may be really, really raw, but we hear great songs great vocal, it's unique and compelling, and you know that's something we could probably take really quick to radio and it'll work. Other things like Joe was referring to, like a Chris Stapleton, needs more time to bake.
I think the other thing that's going to be interesting is one more thing. There is getting to be the point where superstars like a Taylor Swift will have the opportunity to make their decision to go alone.
Right.
Because they're not at the point where they need traditional. It's a yet another iteration of what the model is. And I think there'll be other people that follow through. There's not 50 of those people. There may be 50 worldwide, depending on whether you're in South Korea or Japan, but in the United States there's not. But it will open up a different model for all of us to be dealing with down the road, especially when you have somebody that young.
Right. Thank
All
you,
right,
guys.
let's grab one more. I think we have time for one more.
Tim Freeman with Hark. You guys mentioned radio earlier, and you touched on a little bit of this in the previous answer. What do you think the future and the runway is for radio with the rise of technologies like Spotify and on-demand services, which I'm sure we haven't seen the end of yet? And what does that look like?
Well, I mean, day in and day out, it's still, as I said, it's still the thing that drives most discovery, even though that sounds counterintuitive when you say it out loud, but it is still, all the research really points to that. So I think it's going to be a while before that completely declines and it's taken over. There's no doubt I've got in my household, I've got an 18-year-old and a 22-year-old, and I can see even between the 22-year-old and the 18-year-old, the difference in all that in terms of spending time on terrestrial radio and spending time just on streaming. So I think it's a generational thing. I think that, but it's still very, very significant. And it's still, if I don't get an artist to critical mass airplay, I don't have any chance of really selling records or breaking them to a significant level so that they can tour there.
I think it's going to take time.
Yeah.
I mean, we're seeing the numbers come down, but it's still the bulk of the listening, and it depends on formats. Not every format is the same, but there's still a hold, and there's still 10,000 radio stations out there still doing a business and broadcasting. It may change with the generation, but it's going to take time.
And terrestrial radio's got something that streaming radio doesn't have, that doesn't necessarily impact the discovery side. Well, profitability. But profitability is one piece of it. But the other piece is that ability to localize. So in markets where there's still localization, terrestrial radio has a place, and it's a strong place. But in order to fill out, they still need content. So radio still has a place. It's still where you get your traffic a lot of times because you don't have to be staring at a screen while you're finding out that local stuff.
Very interesting. Thank you.
I believe that concludes our part of the program. Thank you very much for being a great audience, and thank you to my panelists.
Good job, Dave.